This is Dan Turchin from AI and the Future of Work. Welcome to this month's special episode featuring three great previous guests discussing artificial general intelligence. As you know, we're using 11 Labs to digitize my voice for these special episodes. The real me approved the content and, of course, approved the digital twin. This month, we're exploring one of the most fascinating and controversial frontiers in technology, artificial general intelligence. What does AGI mean? How close are we to achieving it? And what happens as machines increasingly appear to think like us? To answer those questions, you'll hear from three extraordinary guests, Peter Voss, Babak Hodjat, and Pankaj Kedia. Each brings a unique perspective on what AGI is, what it isn't, and how it could reshape the future of humanity and work. We start with Peter Voss, CEO and chief scientist at Aigo.ai, and one of the pioneers who actually coined the term AGI. In this clip, Peter explains why he believes today's large language models are an off-ramp from true intelligence, and why the future lies in building cognitive architectures that more closely resemble how humans learn and reason.
You're part of the pantheon of AI greatness, having been part of a small team that coined that term AGI. So I got to ask you kind of a foundational question up front. What is AGI to you, and how will we know when we achieve it?
When I started working on this, I came across a number of other people who had similar ideas, that we basically wanted to go back to the original mission, the original dream of AI from 69 years ago. I mean, the original idea of when the term AI was coined was to build thinking machines that can think, learn, and reason the way humans do. They actually thought they could crack this in a year or two. It turned out to be much, much harder. And so what happened to the field of AI over the many decades is that it turned into a field of narrow AI, where really it's the external intelligence, it's the intelligence of the programmer that solved a particular problem on how to do container optimization or how to write a program that can play a mean game of chess. It's really not that the intelligence was in the software as much as the programmer or data scientist today figure out how to get a computer to solve a particular set of problems. So I came across a group of other people who also felt that the time had come that hardware and software technology and theoretical advances had progressed to a point that we could have another crack at this original dream of AI. And so we decided to write a book on the topic, and three of us, Ben Goertzel, Shane Legg, and myself, were brainstorming the title of the book, and we basically decided on artificial general intelligence. And like the G in there as well, because in psychology, little g actually stands for general intelligence of humans. Not to tie it too much to humans. What is AGI, and how will we know when we have it? It's actually kind of easy to describe. And I'll talk about how the term is being abused right now as well. But the original idea is really to have machines that can learn by themselves, largely autonomously, to any profession, any task that a competent human can do. And I'm talking about cognitive tasks here, not robotics and so on. So think of it of any desk-bound job. So they could teach themselves to become a cancer researcher or an accountant or programmer or manager or any of these things, and be able to do this at a competence level of human or greater. That is AGI in my mind. And that, of course, opens up tremendous prospects for helping human flourishing by being able to solve problems that are really difficult for humans to solve by themselves.
So there's a big gap that anyone steeped in the AI community acknowledges between the current state of LLMs using the transformer model, trained using deep learning techniques, and what you or I would probably consider cognitive skills. Talk about what that gap looks like to you, and why should the audience believe that what seems even sentient today really doesn't have the kind of cognitive skills that we probably associate with AGI?
Right. Yes, I've written quite about this. And it's interesting. Just today, I came across Jan LeCun just made another sort of statement, follow-up statement, and I quote him here. On the path towards AGI, an LLM is basically an off-ramp, a distraction, a dead end. And he actually doesn't like the term AGI, but I kind of paraphrased that. And I would agree totally with that. If you start off with understanding what intelligence requires, what is important in human intelligence, there's kind of a laundry list, and I've written quite a number of articles detailing that. But one of the things is you need to be able to learn in real time, and you need to be able to conceptualize new things. I mean, as we are having a discussion, every sentence that you hear, we immediately integrate that and say, does this make sense? Do I understand it? Does this contradict something that I already know? And it might take you off on a path to try and figure out, or it might update your knowledge. And really human intelligence, and then the ability to generalize in real time, to make the connections between things you already know, and then suddenly you have an insight about some generalization, some abstract concept. I mean, that's how innovation happens. So it's really this interactive, real-time conceptual learning, I think, is absolutely key to human level intelligence. Another aspect is metacognition, or what Daniel Kahneman calls system 2 thinking. It's being able to monitor your thought processes, to know when you don't know something, or to figure out that you need to think more about something. In fact, part of the 5 years that I spent studying, one of the things I spent quite a lot of time on is working on a new type of IQ test that doesn't have cultural bias. And I spent almost a year on that. And one of the interesting things I learned from that was that metacognition is actually the most direct predictor of general intelligence or general ability. And so it's basically being able to apply the appropriate thought process appropriate to the problem that you're solving. Some problems require you to think logically about them. Others need more of intuition, or other problems simply aren't solvable, and you need to also be able to recognize that, and so on. Yeah, those are some of the real-time learning cognition, I think, are really essential requirements for the kind of intelligence we want, to be able to learn any task and to be able to adapt in real time. I mean, things change. You might be doing customer service. Now, suddenly there's a snowstorm. Okay, things change, and your products change, your customer base changes. Whatever the application is, or if you're a lawyer, some new law was passed, immediately the advice you have to give people is differently, or somebody gave you new insight, something that you misunderstood previously. So intelligence really requires this dynamic conceptualization and metacognition. Of course, the other thing that's kind of obvious is that our brain uses 20 watts of power. So there's something horribly wrong when you need 20 gigawatts or something to achieve your results.
Peter, we're going to have Jan come on for a future episode of this podcast. Maybe you'll rejoin us then for a hearty debate about AGI.
I would love to. I have enormous respect for him, but he knows what's wrong, but I don't think he understands what the right path to AGI is.
So if in fact LLMs are an off-ramp on the superhighway to AGI, what's the on-ramp back? Or maybe a better phrasing is, how do we get in the fast lane to AGI if LLMs and deep learning are an off-ramp?
So there are a couple of ways to look at this. I think a very useful way to look at it is DARPA a few years published something they called the 3 waves of AI. And what that is, the first wave is basically good old-fashioned AI. What we practiced for many decades is basically largely logic-based approaches, such as expert systems, and Deep Blue would have been an example of that as well. So that's the first wave. The second wave, of course, hit us like a tsunami about, 12 years ago maybe, when people figured out how they could use massive amounts of data and massive amounts of computing power to make neural networks do really interesting things. Initially, it was image recognition and categorization. So the whole deep learning revolution, basically, which is now culminated in generative AI. I mean, it's just an evolution of deep learning, of the deep learning revolution, really. But it's all about big data, big compute, lots of data and statistical approaches. It's basically, that's a fundamental. That's the second wave we're in. The third wave is what is best described as cognitive AI. And that is exactly the kind of adaptive system that you have that can operate autonomously because it knows what it's doing, because it can learn by itself. So that's the third wave. And I believe the final wave, really the wave to get us to AGI, is cognitive AI. Now, people have been building cognitive architectures, which are very closely related to cognitive AI, but not exactly. To me, cognitive AI is exactly to start with the question of what is intelligence or what is important in human intelligence. That has to be your starting point. I believe you have to understand intelligence in order to build something that is intelligent, and not, hey, we've got a lot of data, we've got a lot of compute, what can we do with it? I mean, it's been amazing. I mean, let's make no bones about it. The ChatGPT and the things that are coming out are absolutely mind-blowing in what they can do, but they're not AGI, and they're not on the path to AGI. So it's starting off with understanding intelligence and then creating a system, building an architecture that inherently is built to make these things possible, for a system to be able to learn without backpropagation, to be able to learn in real time incrementally. So the system has to be designed from the ground to accommodate the requirements of intelligence. So yeah, it's cognitive AI.
Next up is Babak Hodjat, CTO of AI at Cognizant, one of the original inventors of Siri, and a thought leader in distributed AI systems. Babak shares his perspective on what it means to talk about manifestations of intelligence, why embodiment is essential, and why AGI requires more than just scaling large models.
Like me, your definition of what AI is has evolved over the years. How has your thinking about the technology changed?
Yes. When you start, you think, okay, there must be an algorithm running in our heads, and let's try to figure that out. At least that was the case for me. And then after a while, you start defining what are the manifestations of intelligence that we encounter. And it becomes bigger than intelligence in the brain from some respects. On the other hand, it can be defined to operate in a smaller scope as well. So you have both of those options. And I think the field has been successful in both counts. In other words, let's try to make it smarter in many of the aspects of intelligence we know of than humans. And we've been successful in doing that if we pick these aspects separately and looking at them in isolation. And then there's the other aspect, which is, okay, let's try to simplify the domain in which intelligence is being applied and see how well it can do in that simplified domain, which is also, I think, something that we've been successful at. It ebbs and flows, this focus on whether or not we're creating a general intelligence versus, no, it's an intelligence applied to a certain specific use case, and then back to, no, it is general intelligence. And I think we're still going through that oscillation in the field right now.
I like that term, manifestations of intelligence, because it implies a more nuanced definition. One of my concerns about the impact that LLMs have had on the public's perception of intelligence is that it distills what intelligence is down into a very narrow set of, I will call them, parlor tricks that LLMs are designed to do very well, when in fact, I believe that intelligence is a much broader topic. And I'd love to get from you, your perspective. You use the term manifestations of intelligence. What are maybe some of the manifestations of intelligence that might imply that we're further from what anyone would call artificial general intelligence than what the foundational LLM models might suggest?
A very important one is that intelligence, at least in humans, manifests itself in an embodied manner. And fundamentally, LLMs do not have that. As humans, we are born with, the capability to exhibit intelligence in tackling problems and predicting what's going to happen and making decisions and being creative and so forth. But all of that is actually applied and learned and improved in an embodied manner. It's my intelligence as a person, as a person operating in that, timeline that starts with my birth, continues with my life. Whereas an LLM is basically absorbing a snapshot of the internet, essentially, and learning from this operating system of intelligence we know of, which is language, and trying to, essentially predict what is the next token in a string of tokens. And by virtue of doing that, predict what we would expect an intelligence system to manifest. And so in that respect, it's very different. What does that mean? That means that we can change our minds. We can encounter a new situation and be creative about it, and these systems can't because they're not embodied. We can look at things like consciousness, and that is something that it's difficult to character, let's say, personality. It's something that's very difficult to pin down in an LLM. It could have all the personalities in the world and none of them at the same time. And so there's a fundamental difference between the two. That doesn't mean that LLMs are not fascinatingly powerful. These systems are able to do things we thought would be very difficult, if not impossible to do when it comes to understanding language, when it comes to utilizing language, reasoning, poetry, translation from one language to another. These are things that these systems are showing. And I think of LLMs as this proof of existence. There's at least one way, which is through language modeling and a specific kind of architecture, that a deep learning system trained on, a snapshot of the internet can have this emergent behavior, much of which we associate with human intelligence, that up until a few years ago, we did not expect, starting from such simple first principles, to be able to attain. So I don't want to belittle what we've stumbled upon with LLMs. These systems are very useful and very powerful, but also very different than the type of intelligence that at least we see in humans.
It's very easy to talk about next word or next token prediction and make it clear to the public why there are obvious limitations of LLMs and why they hallucinate, and explain some of their bad behavior. But as a technologist, I got to ask you, have there been times when you look at you call them emergent properties or capabilities of LLMs, and just set aside, a willing suspension of disbelief, that where you're surprised that they can do things that, that transformer architecture, maybe we never even thought it was capable of doing?
Absolutely. I think it's, again, for those of us who are in the field and understand how these systems are put together, it's very easy to be dismissive of this accomplishment and say, oh, it's just, coming up with a probability distribution on the next token. And therefore it's stochastic. And therefore, as you go forward and predict more tokens, you're in uncharted territory. It shouldn't work. But the reality is, in many cases, it is working. And I think we need to learn from that. The fact that starting from such a simple first principle, just predict what's the next token in a string of tokens. Just from that, we are getting this kind of capabilities emerging from the behavior of the system, should teach us a lot about the nature of intelligence, even in humans. It's one of those aha moments when you think, as humans and higher order animals, that is what we do. We try to predict what's next. That's all our brain is about, is trying to predict what's next and then take the proper action around that. And so maybe that is the first principle that allowed us as humans to be able to be intelligent the way we define it. So I'm not dismissive of that at all. The fact, though, is that I don't think that our brains use back propagation. I don't think that we have a fixed structure like these transformer-based architectures at this scale that is so difficult to readjust and train. If anything, we think human brains are very plastic. Brain plasticity is amazingly flexible in reassigning at very low energy levels different roles and absorbing different beliefs. And clearly, the current trajectory and the way we're doing large language models right now does not lend itself to that. So I think again, taking it as a proof of existence is a good idea.
Finally, we'll hear from Pankaj Kedia, AI investor, advisor, mentor, speaker, and founder of 2468 Ventures. Pankaj offers a refreshing view from outside Silicon Valley, reflecting on the social, cultural, and ethical questions raised by AGI. He explores how different communities experience technology and why the debate about general intelligence can't be separated from human values.
Pankaj, I'd like to know, when you and I are back here having a version of this conversation in a decade, and you've invested in 10x the number of companies you have now, and you have 10x more scars, what's one thing that will be different about the way we work as humans that might today seem like science fiction, but we'll see just be commonplace in a decade?
Yeah. So Dan, you're asking me to look at my crystal ball. AI is moving so fast. It's literally difficult to predict what will happen the next quarter or the next year. But I think the next phase is AGI. The next phase is the age of abundance. By the end of this decade, I don't think we would need to work. We would work only if we want to work. By the end of this decade, I think we'll work from anywhere. While we got used to working from home over the last few years during COVID, literally, the age of intelligence would give you all the tools that you can collaborate the way you want. You can work the way you want. From Earth, or for that matter, from Mars, I think things will change in smaller ways. The tools we use, the technologies we use, but big picture, working will be a choice. And when you have a choice, you do your best work. When you want to work, not when you need to work, then you bring your heart and soul and mind. And I think that will accelerate the possibilities with AI. Today, when we talk about AI, we primarily talk about productivity improvement. The use case exists. How do you make it faster, cheaper, better? And we are seeing some significant improvements in productivity, 30%, 50%, 70%. These numbers are not unheard of. Now, if you fast forward 5 years from now, if every person brings his or her own self, full self, then it will not be just about faster, cheaper, better. It will be about creating new use cases. It will be about finding the next drug. For all the resources and effort, we have not been able to cure cancer or diabetes or Alzheimer's. To be able to crack the nut there, we would need people to bring their full self. Or think about autonomous driving. Or think about how education might change. Education has not changed for the last umpteen years, decades. It's always a one-to-many. We'll make that possible. We'll change that. We'll make one-to-one education possible. We will go from doing things faster, cheaper, better to doing new things. And that will transform how we think about work.
AGI is both a misunderstood end goal and the topic of fierce debate. As we heard from Peter, Babak, and Pankaj, the path to building machines with human-like intelligence is complex, uncertain, and full of conflicting visions. Whether it's Peter's focus on cognitive architectures, Babak's argument for embodiment, or Pankaj's reminder of the human context, today's discussion shows us that AGI is not just about technology. It's about the future of how humans interact with machines. If you enjoyed this episode, check out the full conversations with our guests. Links are in today's show notes. And don't forget to share this compilation with a friend or colleague curious about AGI. Thanks for tuning in to this special edition of AI and the Future of Work. Until next time.